right, welcome into Are You Cirrus? A special episode here for Hurricane Week. Of course, a good reminder, Hurricane Week this entire week here, getting you prepped for the season.
Yep.
Did a little bit later this year, and now multiple podcasts throughout the week leading up to our live podcast at the end of the week.
Yeah.
I think I covered it all.
Yeah, I think you got it all. And I'm kind of excited about this one because we oftentimes talk about covering tropical systems, covering hurricanes from sort of this side of the business, this side of the camera, the television side. We're going to switch it though, and we're going to go to the government side, the local emergency management side, and really get a cool inside scoop, I think. I'm excited about this. Let's jump right into it with our guest, Thomas Bell, Public Information Officer for Horry County Emergency Management. Thomas, thank you, first of all, for being here.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me on today.
Yeah.
To chat.
You guys, Horry County Emergency Management as a whole is, and not just bragging because you're here, but like one of the best in the country.
Appreciate you saying that. I will say that we have it's a great team, a great program, really across the state from the local, county, and state level. The emergency management program here is really just top notch. And, we joke that, the reason that maybe we are effective in our role as emergency management is we've seen a thing or two over the years. So,
Right.
We say get the reps in, and unfortunately we do get the reps in here in Horry County.
Right.
Just about every season for hurricanes, it seems.
One of the big things that we're kind of focusing on this week, and we try to focus on at the beginning of every hurricane season, is evacuations. 2 years ago, we switched it, mixed it up a little bit. Tell us why.
Yeah, so just about every 10 years, the Storm Surge Unit and the National Hurricane Center, they look at the data. They are always getting, better data, better computer systems to kind of figure out what makes the most sense. So they did that. They provided that new data to the State Emergency Management Division. They sent that to all the coastal counties and said, hey, the new data is in. We want to make sure we're being as accurate and responsible with these evacuation zones as possible, because you don't want to over-evacuate because obviously people fall into that complacency. I live so and so many miles away from the coast. What do I really need to evacuate for storm surge? I've never seen it in my however many years I've lived here. But you also want to make sure that you're covering the areas that truly do see that risk from storm surge. So it was a great collaborative effort between the National Hurricane Center's data, the State Emergency Management Division, and then at the local level, the counties and municipalities coming together, looking at that data and mapping, hey, what makes sense with these evacuation zones? Because historically we had much broader zones, and these are much more narrow, they're much more focused, and they're much more in line with what has been seen over the last couple of years with the storms. Not to say that there's that one in however many millionths chance of that perfect storm that really overperforms and sends that storm surge, but what is the most likely, the average of what we would expect with these storms? And that's really why those evacuation zones changed, because we wanted a more accurate picture, a better understanding of who truly is at risk from the storm surge and who would really need to leave, versus is it a little egregious to ask folks a little farther away that they've never seen it. We really don't think they're in that path. We do point out, though, whether you are in the evacuation zone or not, it is just one hazard, the storm surge. We all know tropical systems have many hazards on these couches, and we inform folks, do what you're most comfortable with. So if you're out of the zone, you were taken out of a zone, you can still evacuate. You can still go to a shelter if they open, things like that.
Thomas, let me ask you this, because one of the big popular things that we are finding in TV, and I'm sure you all are as well, we're growing at such a fast rate. Your messaging is almost like, okay, we're switching the zone now, so everyone figure out your new zone if it is new. But then B, you have people here that have never experienced a hurricane that just moved in. What's the most common question for new people coming to town?
Oh, it really runs the gamut. Obviously, the evacuation zones, just understanding that is always top of mind. Where they should go, I think when people talk about evacuations, they look for that magic number. How far do I need to go? What town, what city safe? Which is always that conversation that it's a little ambiguous, right? It depends on a lot of factors, where that storm's going, the impacts of the storm, what their capabilities are. Do they have reliable transportation to go somewhere else? Is it, a car that, can get from point A to B locally, but should it go a couple hundred miles for an evacuation? Lots of things factor into that. So we answer that a lot. A lot of folks, if they're new to the county, they've never been through a tropical system, a hurricane, it's just a general fear. So when we go and talk to them, I think you guys probably experience this too, they feel a little more at ease.
Yeah.
They kind of understand it a bit more. And that's really it. Knowledge is power. So if we can get folks to just kind of, take a breath, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, a big hurricane is going to be impactful for the county. Even the small ones can be impactful for the county. But it's just having them understand these are the steps to take to get you better prepared.
Yeah.
We're never going to be 100% prepared, but we can be in a better mindset about it. We can understand the steps we need to take. And we tell folks, preparedness doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. I think folks, hear emergency management, they think, prepper, survival mode, I need to go buy that 6-month tub of food from Costco. And that's not what we're asking.
Yeah.
We ask for a 3-day minimum of preparedness of goods on hand in your household. A lot of those items that we recommend in an emergency kit are already in the household. So it's just putting those together and just coming up with a plan. We say you can't plan or fully prepare for a storm if it's already in our forecast.
Yeah.
You're going to be behind the 8 ball.
Yep.
So that's just it. We're just trying to get folks, hey, sunny day, preferably outside of hurricane season, time to start thinking about these plans.
Yeah.
And those plans, and that's one of the things that we try to drive home is those plans. Everybody wants like a one sheet. All right, here's what you do. This is it, and you check off the boxes and you're set. But everybody, every family, every person is completely different, and I think really driving home is how do you plan for you? Every June, you and I meet at Covenant Towers.
That's right.
We talk to the senior citizens there. And we always kind of joke because they're stubborn old people and they don't want to leave Covenant Towers. And but they, for example, that group has a much different set of issues they need to think about.
Yep.
Medicine, oxygen for some of them, being in a wheelchair, being immobile, than say a family of 3 over in Carolina Forest. So you have to really sort of get specific with your actual needs.
Absolutely. We say every storm is different, just like everyone's household is different. Obviously, in an emergency kit, there's going to be a lot of overlap. Everyone's going to need food, water, first aid kit, but there are going to be those specialty items. Maybe you are in an older household, there's some chronic conditions, prescription medications. What do you do about those? So we tell folks, have the conversation with your doctors and pharmacists. If you're on a 30-day supply, can you go to a 60 or 90-day during hurricane season, or at the very least peak hurricane season? Could you figure out which pharmacy, if you're going to evacuate to Augusta, what pharmacy you'd go there to get the script filled out if you can't do it here? So to that point, everyone is going to have a different situation.
Right.
And it is kind of having that time set aside to really plan, walk through the scenarios, and be honest with yourself. What can, in my household, or I as a person, can I handle? What is my threshold for that uncomfortableness? Because when a storm comes and we're getting impacts, convenience is off the table.
Yeah.
You can't run to the McDonald's drive-thru for dinner. You can't go run to the grocery store and pick up something that you might need that you ran out of. So what is that level of inconvenience you're willing to take on? And ultimately, it's just life safety. We want our people to be safe, our residents, our visitors. So if you can be at your home, it's built well, you have supplies on hand, you think you can ride out the storm, we say, okay.
Yeah.
But if you're in an evacuation zone, we really say, are you sure? That being said, we tell folks, if you're going to stay, whether you're in an evacuation zone or not, you are basically agreeing to take on the risks of the storm within your own household. And that's for a couple of reasons, but mainly is that if there's an incident, someone gets hurt, they need to go to the hospital, still call 911, let us know, and the government, hey, we need help, but we may be delayed sending a crew to you because the conditions are just too dangerous for our folks to be out there. So we just want folks to understand, if I stay, I'm going to be taking on those risks. There's going to be some inconvenience. What is my threshold for that? So having that plan, having that understanding, figuring out those decision trigger points of when, hey, okay, Jamie and Andrew are on TV, they're getting a little more serious, the language has changed, they've, instead of a first alert weather day, it's a first alert weather week. We don't love that. That's my threshold of, okay, we're going to pack the car and go.
Yeah.
So it's just figuring out what is kind of that personal, risk you're willing to accept, that inconvenience you're willing to accept, and just understanding you may be on your own for a bit.
And I feel like too with hurricane season, like you start out and you move here, that risk is a lot lower. It's like, I'm not willing to take the risk. But then you ride a couple storms out. Okay, I think I get this. Let me ask you this and kind of reverse the role for you, Thomas. You've been here for a while now. You've been here for many hurricanes.
Enough years, yep, that's the thing.
What are some things that you all in emergency management, especially for Horry County, have learned through previous years with storms that apply to the plan as we go into another season?
So I think, one of the big learnings is you look back to the 2016 and 2018 storms,
Yeah.
Matthew and Florence, the flooding.
Yeah.
Because those both set record flooding for the county, riverine flooding. Of course, there was flash flooding involved as well, but that riverine flood threat, we really learned in emergency management where water can go at its maximum.
Right.
Because, we had the record flooding with Matthew. We're like, okay, that was a lot.
2 years
2
later,
years
like,
later,
hold my
watch
beer.
this.
Yeah, hold my beer.
the Southeast River Forecast Center are saying, add potentially 6 feet on top of those numbers. And
Right.
at that point, you have to come out and say, we're not exactly sure where the water's going to go because we've
Right.
never seen this. So that was a big learning. And
Yep.
a lot of things came out of that, especially education. There were grant programs for that repetitive loss flooding in certain areas, things like that. So a lot of mitigation went into flooding post those events, just because we've now hopefully seen the maximum
Yeah.
of that. Never say never, but the probability of beating a Florence is not super high.
Right.
So, we think there's that. So that's one of those big things that we've learned. And then a big proponent is just that growth, that education of new people coming in. So, we may say, wow, we really sound repetitive with what we're putting out on social media and what we say to the groups, but there's always going to be someone new who's never heard this before.
Yeah.
Or maybe had heard some bad information. Now, and you guys deal with it too, is that misinformation, especially on social media.
Oh, yeah.
That's been a big thing over
It's a
the
whole
last
episode.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
and that takes a lot of time, especially from the public information team, to combat that. Always a lot of rumors. We remind folks we follow the National Hurricane Center forecast. Listen to the local meteorologists. Please do not just find someone who's out somewhere in the middle of the country who
Right.
maybe chases tornadoes and says, "Oh, hurricane's coming to Myrtle Beach in 10 days."
Right.
It doesn't help anyone. So just trying to get folks to really vet the information before they share it. And then one of the big things we always see is, and we hear about, is a lot of folks who move from the Northeast, the Midwest. They need to let their families back home what they're doing, because we say disasters start and end locally. So yes, you're going to have the national news come in. They're going to cover it for the first 24, 48 hours, and then they're going to go. If we're still having impacts with power outages, the cell towers damage, whatever it might be, your friends and family may be like, what's going on? So they're going to call us saying, hey, I haven't heard from my brother, my cousin. Can someone go check it out? Case by case basis. It's a very big county with a lot of folks, so letting them know what your plan is, let them know you have a plan for the hurricane, so that, okay, I haven't heard from them, but I know in their plan they're going to be over here and they'll try to get in contact as soon as possible. It just goes a long way to keeping everyone in that loop, because if you're not following the local news here, you're not going to be getting the full story as to the different efforts that are going on.
Let's get into the nitty gritty now. Let's have some fun.
Okay.
It's not fun, but let's dive into this. What is the scenario that keeps Thomas Bell up at night for Horry County Emergency Management? Speaking of, tropical weather, what is your oh God moment?
I think that the one thing that we talk about a lot when we go out into the public education groups and things like that is we're overdue for a bigger storm. We know that for a Cat 3 or higher hurricane. We know that is on our table. That clock is ticking.
Well past.
It's working overtime and collecting those hours. So that certainly concerns us, because even though we've seen a tropical system just about every year since 2014, they've all been, some of the major impact events, but they've been Category 1s, coming at us as a Category 2. They still kind of degrade as they come up the southeast coast. So knowing that exists, that possibility of, hey, is this going to be the season we see that Cat 3 or 4, and is it going to be landfall here? I mean, it could be landfall down in Charleston like a Hugo and still have big impacts up here. It's getting people to understand that risk is inherent because we live on the southeast coast. And that certainly is something that we would just want folks to take seriously. Florence 2018 was kind of expected to be that until it decided it wasn't going to be that. So a lot of folks who did evacuate, they did comply, but they got very upset on the back end when it wasn't that major hit, but they couldn't get back home because of that riverine flooding. And they were sitting in traffic, and I'm sure a lot of people said, I'll never leave again for whatever. But it's very different. And that certainly is something that we are aware of. We plan for it. We have plenty of plans in place. We work with our external agencies and partners to make sure, hey, for the big ones, do we have these transportation plans in place? Do we have what we need pre-positioned? The answer is yes, we're ready, but you can never account for what are people going to do, and that's always the wild card.
Yeah.
I always point out disasters do not exist in a vacuum. We can be preparing for that big hurricane, and you can have a number of incidents still happen. You can have a big fire. We can have another, pandemic outbreak, whatever it might be. There's certainly that level of entropy, that chaos exists out there. So, what takes resources away from what we might be preparing to do? This has been a very active year for disasters or big events, from snow and ice to wildfires.
We haven't even made it to the season yet.
We haven't even gotten there. So, it's at least it's something that, we are ramped up for, we're prepared for. But certainly that big one, that potential exists. I joke I have 25 years before I have full retirement. So if I can wait till season 26, I'd be pretty happy. But no, but that's why we have the conversations we have. We stay prepared all year round. Hurricane season ends November 30th, December 1st. Okay, what went well? What's the after actions for any storms? We're getting ready, and obviously that's what our role is. That's our job. We don't need people to be that serious, but at least if you get prepared for a hurricane, you can be prepared for almost anything else that could be thrown at this county. To at least a level of degree.
Let's go some more inside baseball. Kind of walk through the process. We've talked about the cone. We've had millions of podcasts about the cone. So let's take us someday into the future. It's September. There's a storm out there, and that day comes. We've seen it coming for 2 or 3 days. Looks like East Coast is the threat, and then that 5-day forecast comes out, and the coast of South Carolina and Horry County are in the cone. That's sort of our internally here. That's kind of like our, all right, we're flipping the switch. We're going big. What is that day like for you guys?
Yeah, I'll even take it one step further back. Whenever we kind of see that cone take that bend towards South Carolina, we're already probably in conversation. We have great relationships with the forecasters down at the National Hurricane Center, so we can send that message and say, what are we feeling? And they're usually pretty good about, hey, you guys might want to just keep an eye on things. So we're watching that forecast, we're watching what they're putting out, what y'all are saying. Once we get into that cone of uncertainty, it does become decisions start having to be made. Meetings are taking place even before that, as I mentioned, once that curve exists. But what really starts is there's going to be the conversation about, is this going to be impactful to Horry County? How impactful? What do we need to do? So that's when you have the emergency management team meet with the public safety department heads, the executive team for Horry County government, and they start having those conversations as to, what are the forecasts saying? What are we expecting? What's going to need to happen? We're plugged in with State Emergency Management Division. They're probably going to start holding daily calls with the counties to say, okay, any evacuation recommendations, going over the forecast details, up to that point and saying, okay, what's y'all's recommendation? Do you have any unmet needs? And then the big one, of course, is are you going to activate your emergency operations center? Are you going to change operating condition levels? That's where that always starts. So we, in terms of the, there's, that's the behind the scenes, a lot's going on. So, the public is watching, okay, well, there's the cone. What are we telling them? So I always inform folks, if there's something out there, we in Horry County Emergency Management, we don't like to cry wolf. We try not to talk about any system unless there's going to be impacts of some sort to this county. So if there's going to start being something interesting that we think impacts are going to happen, those calls are starting to happen, we'll go out on social media, we'll tell the reporters here, we'll say, we are monitoring hurricane, tropical storm, whoever. That's just kind of we see it, we want y'all to see it, start getting it on your radars because it's already appearing on the actual radars. Then when it gets to okay, we know we're going to activate the Emergency Operations Center for the county and move to that OPCON 2. We have 3 operating condition levels. 3 is everything's fine, 2 is we're getting ready, and 1 is something's imminent or happening. So we know we're going to move to 2, and that activation happens. We try to give a little bit of heads up to the public. We'll say, we are closely monitoring. Closely monitoring means our next update is probably that press release saying we're activating. That's when I joke that Hurricane Week starts because most people, if they've been around, they're like, okay, that catches the attention. They're going to go start getting prepared. So that's when that happens. Before we send out that release that we're activating, we're contacting our external partners for those emergency support functions. So from the Red Cross to Highway Patrol to, you know, our partners in locally in public safety, we're letting them know, hey, we need a representative to come to us for, you know, these different ESFs. Everything we do is scalable, so it doesn't mean we're doing a full activation. We might just need a few folks, few agencies, but they're being told this is when you need to report in. We then send out that release that we've activated. That's usually when I hear from y'all's colleagues about, hey, can we get an interview, which is totally fine, and we start really ramping up that preparedness. But
that OpCon is what always that's when the phones ring and that's when the emails start.
It's the big one, and it's great. And you know, we have a very active media market here with y'all and the others. And for those of you who've been here for around a while, it's nice because I do start getting the texts of like, are y'all going to activate? And usually I can just say like, monitor your inbox for the next few hours, because it can be quick. Sometimes we have we know, okay, we can activate, tomorrow at noon.
Yeah.
Other times it's quick. It can be like, hey, today at 4:30 because just the conditions, the forecast is
We've had a couple of
changing.
those.
It can be quick. We say that, as far as tropical systems, it's typically a disaster that we know is coming. There have been certainly times where I think we've all gone to bed and there's a 30% chance of development off the coast, and we wake up to tropical storm whoever.
Right.
And not usually super impactful, but they do sometimes surprise. So we try to give people as much of a heads up of like, we're taking it seriously, we're starting to get things done, we need y'all to start acting on your personal preparedness plans, because we can't make a plan for everyone in this county. So it's kind of like, if we're starting to do stuff, y'all should start to do stuff too, because we think impacts are likely.
I'm sitting at home and I'm watching our coverage or something. I'm a viewer, obviously. We've kind of described what it's like behind the scenes during a hurricane here, controlled chaos. What would you say to the listener or viewer for the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center? What, if we were to go in there during a hurricane, what would we see? What would we hear?
So you would see a lot of collaboration and communication going on, because there's a lot of different departments, agencies that come in to support the overall mission of life safety and property protection and things like that here in Horry County. So you're going to just see a lot of different, I always say logos, that alphabet soup we joke about at the federal level. It's like that, but on a local scale. Lots of different coordination going on as to what needs to be done prior to the storm. Public safety crews, if there's going to be that big hit, are we going to know we're going to need search and rescue? Is the FEMA task force kind of getting ramped up into that? Incident management teams if needed, things like that. So it's a lot of discussion. It's kind of a low hum constantly in that room. We have space for 84 folks to sit at a desk console, but for a big storm, I wouldn't be shocked for 100, 120 people to be in there. So it's noisy, and I always say the adrenaline comes in waves. It's one of those things where before the storm, a lot's happening, a lot of the messaging goes out, and then it's kind of like you're waiting for the storm to make landfall or for the impacts to start.
The worst part for us,
and I think for folks, it can be very confusing, because they're like, okay, you said that a lot of stuff's happening, but nothing's happening or it's going to happen. So it's kind of like, well, I'll believe it when I see it.
Right.
So we always tell folks, if they're going to be new to coming into the emergency EOC for an emergency support function or to work it, just to understand that it's going to be waves of adrenaline. You have to know kind of how to manage that, because it will be 100 things have to happen at once, and then it'll be everything seems manageable. And then everything happens at once, and it ebbs and flows like that. Certainly they have the radios going on, the public safety folks are in there, so we are also in the same building as the 911 for Horry County, so we can be aware of any calls that are happening. Certainly some of the storms as of late, there have been those fires at some of the waterfront houses. That certainly raises the level of, I won't say stress, but of action in the EOC, so people are focused on that. Meanwhile, there might be, hey, we need to open another shelter up. Red Cross, DSS, those folks are working on that. So it's a lot of different groups working together for the overall mission. For folks who are interested, we follow the National Incident Management System, the incident command structure. FEMA has a lot of that up on their website that folks can just kind of take a look at if they're interested in. But everyone who comes into the EOC, everyone who has an awareness of this, they all go through some of that training. So everyone knows where they can kind of plug and play and get ready. We make sure that in emergency management, that is not the first time someone hopefully sees our Emergency Operations Center at an actual activation.
Right.
We do a number of training and exercises throughout the year just to get folks familiar with the processes, how to use some of the online systems, things like that, just so everyone is a little more comfortable. They get to meet the team. Because emergency management, a lot of it is about relationships.
Yeah.
Emergency management department, this is not the department that goes out and are, pulling people out of the floodwaters. That's fire rescue. Those are those crews. But it is really kind of the management of this situation itself. Like, how can we best, allocate resources? Are there unmet needs? How do we pull those in? Who needs to be at the table for these decisions? That's where emergency management kind of catches all of that into that umbrella, that ecosystem. And, also this public education piece to make sure people understand these are the things you should do to get ready. Because it'll just help the county overall, because the more prepared our citizens are, the residents, the better prepared we are overall as a county.
Yeah. Walk us through the evacuation process. For the old timers that have been here forever, they'll remember the days of voluntary and mandatory evacuations. That was done away with a long time ago. We've got the new zones in place. So what is that process like, sort of deciding to issue that evacuation order and sort of implementing that, because it's a controlled chaos sort of thing when those evacuation orders come down?
Yep, so I will first and foremost say that evacuations for hurricanes, they are mandatory by what they are.
Yep.
They are issued by the governor of South Carolina. That is where that authority lies, so that is a order. That being said, there are so many people in Horry County. If you decide not to leave, are you going to be written a ticket? No.
Yeah.
But once again, it's that conversation if you agree to take on the risks of the storm. So they are mandatory. The governor has the authority to issue those evacuations. Before that decision is made, there's a lot of conversation happening between the local and county emergency management teams and state emergency management division. Here's the forecast, here's what's expected, what are y'all at the local level thinking?
Right.
Whether you want zone A, zone B, zone C. If you go farther south, there's more colors and letters.
Yeah.
So we're very fortunate just to have the three. And then, the timing of that. When would you prefer to go? Because we are up on the north coast of South Carolina. So if it's a coastal runner, Charleston, Beaufort, they're probably going to have evacuation start before we would.
Yeah.
Just based on that timeline. So sometimes we can be like, okay, well, they're going to go, 8 a.m. Monday. Can we do 8 a.m. Tuesday if it's slow enough? Or could we do noon on Monday? It all just depends. So it's a lot of back and forth conversations. What's that storm surge forecast? That's the big one.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Certainly we are no strangers to tidal flooding, 1 to 2 feet of inundation with king tides, sometimes 3, most of the folks in those areas, they understand how to deal with that. It's the visitors that we are more concerned with. So we always tell folks, when we talk to the hospitality groups and stuff, like, please let your, visitors know, your renters, whatever it might be, your policies, your plans for hurricanes and things like that. Let them know, like, hey, you might want to not park your car on this street because it might get inundated. So we try to hit those messaging points. We do a lot of interaction with them through social media when that's starting to happen. So those conversations are happening, and then ultimately that decision for evacuation, it lies with the governor in the governor's office.
Yeah.
So they listen to the recommendations, but ultimately they're going to do what they think is best for the state overall, and that's just when that happens. So if we know, okay, we get word the evacuation is going to start, I'll say Monday 8 a.m. because it's almost always the weekend that gets impacted work-wise for a hurricane.
Fitting.
So, at that point, then we know for our police departments, public safety partners, you're going to probably see some of that traffic control situation going on. Not even lane reversals. We do have those, and we'll talk about those in a second. But there's a presence, right? Because they want to make sure people are being able to move around as freely as possible, keep that traffic moving, things like that. And it can be tough because we could be seeing a storm making a landfall on a Thursday, Friday. Evacuations could start Monday. That might not work for everyone.
Yeah.
Businesses, other people, they might have a doctor's appointment on Tuesday and that doctor's office is still open. We get that. Not everyone needs to leave from Zone A at 8 a.m. if that's Monday, if that's when it's decided. We just say you need to be in your safe place off the roads before the impacts arrive.
Yeah.
So if you're only traveling 2-3 hours, okay, you can probably leave, Wednesday at noon and get there. It all just depends on, once again, people's threshold for, how much they want to go through. Because obviously as the storm gets closer, people get a little more anxious, a little more stressed out, maybe a little more dynamic out there. So we just warn them on that. So folks are going to see State Highway Patrol. They're going to see increased presence from the county police, sheriff, in the municipalities, just to make sure people are able to get around effectively, things like that. At that point, there'll also be the discussions about shelters. If we need to have public shelters open up, what does that look like? What time are they going to open up? And then we announce that to the public as well. We open them up one at a time now in Horry County. It used to be 14 all at once. Poor use of resources. So we try to make sure we are effectively allocating those resources as needed. So we'll let that be known. And then it just goes from there. And are they going to then have to add a new zone? So if it's just A, usually it's A. If there's going to be storm surge of any kind to a degree, up to that 4 foot really, then it's going to be B, C. What does that look like? Obviously, the more zones you add, the more people are going to be probably taking interest. Hurricane Florence is still the only time in our history all 3 zones have been called to evacuate. So.
And the most lonely I'd ever seen Myrtle Beach.
Yeah,
it was a ghost town.
And and that decision is made off of the best information at the time.
Yeah.
It was a Category 4, and we were in the cone of uncertainty.
Myrtle Beach landfall.
Yeah,
I'll never forget that.
You have to make that decision then, and are you happy that that forecast changed? Absolutely. It would have been a very different conversation. Not that Florence wasn't impactful, but Category 4 landfall in Myrtle Beach is a very different conversation to be having today. So you are happy to see that, yes, okay, things changed for the better to a degree for most folks. But we also understand the frustration, right? Because once again, it's that not trying to cry wolf, but we want folks to understand we can't control the weather, despite what some of the online comments say out there. So it's just we have to make the best decision for the total population. And we know what it would take clearance time if everyone was to comply to evacuate in these zones. And it takes a good bit of time to make that happen. So that's why those decisions are made that early on. So a lot of movement can happen a couple of days even before impacts are even starting to arrive, even before the waves get big. It could be blue, sunny skies for a couple of days prior before you're even like, oh, okay, they were right to tell us to get ready and prepare. So
what is the difference between an evacuation order that comes for a storm that's hitting, let's say, early October, and the decision, support, and thought process for a storm that is coming, let's say, Labor Day weekend? Beach is packed.
Yeah, and that's something that is always top of mind because we have a very active summer's weekends here. I mean, 4th of July weekend's coming up. Of course, there's something off the coast which shouldn't be very impactful, but you always see stuff like that. The decision is relatively the same, a lot of the same processes. You might be hearing a bit more from the Chamber and Hospitality Association. Just, we might be trying to understand how many folks are in town truly right now. What are our levels of occupancy? Just so we have that. Those hotels, they make their decisions whether or not to stay open, things like that. We do tell folks, if you're coming to visit Myrtle Beach, please understand the refund policies and things like that. We do not control that. We get a lot of those questions sometimes. But if it comes later in the season, you go from the summer, okay, what does that look like with all the visitors, to the school year, because schools are in session in October, certainly once you get, even in Labor Day too. But what does that look like? Because we don't want the school shut down longer than they have to be. And that's what we use as our public shelters most of the time. So there's always that conversation of what does that look like? It just really, it ebbs and flows of who needs to be part of the conversation, the decision-making process into that executive team. And incident command, and that's really all that changes. The steps are very much the same overall. It just might be different targeting that external messaging where we're like, hey, we're going to reach out to our partners in the Hospitality Association and the Chamber to let the hotels know this is our thinking. We have very good coordination and collaboration across the county, whether you're in a municipality or the unincorporated Horry County. We all talk to each other. We're all aware, and as you kind of mentioned, we've seen a thing or two, so folks typically do trust what is Randy Webster saying, what is Sam Hodge thinking. They look to them because they're just industry titans in emergency management, and we're very fortunate to have both of them here in Horry County. A lot of wisdom and institutional knowledge. So when they speak up, folks listen, and we're very good about it, right? We really do try to level expectations. We don't try to stress people out, but we do have to, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So sometimes we might be using some language and stuff that it's like, hey, the likelihood of this impact is lower, but we still have to say it and get folks to prepare for it, because if it does happen, it's like, oh, sorry, we didn't catch that one. Or we don't want anyone saying, well, I didn't leave because you all didn't say that was going to happen. And it's like, well, you give and take. It's always like with the thunderstorms, we remind folks, hey, it doesn't have to be severe to be impactful. Lightning can strike, lightning
Yeah.
can strike twice. So trying to get people to understand, but it's a whole process. It's a lot of conversation. We're very fortunate that we have a consolidated public information team with the county, so we can work with all those public safety agencies all at once, get on the same message, because we don't want to add to the confusion.
Right.
If we can be, one message, one voice, one decision, it goes a long way. And the last couple of years, we've been really effective with that, with our unified command and things like that.
Going forward, what do you think is the biggest challenge that we face here in Horry County?
It's easy to sum it up in one word: growth, for a number of reasons. Just, more people in harm's way of a hurricane is, always but that's happening all across the Gulf and southeastern coast.
Yeah.
So we're not unique to that by any means. Just past November, the RIDE 4 program passed the ballot initiative, so that will lead to new infrastructure, new roads, which will, aid in getting people, farther out west or north or south safer if they're going to evacuate quicker, which is great. It'll fix some of the infrastructure issues, hopefully mitigate some of that flooding, things like that. And it's just the new folks. It's getting folks to understand, hey, this is the risk. Understand your risk, do the research. There's a lot of information out there that's available to folks, but when you are looking at the listing online and you say, oh, well, it's a great 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, brand new build, that's great, but what's nearby?
Yeah.
What are the water features?
Yeah.
What do the trees look like? What are your main, ingress and egress look like? And these are things we're not always thinking about.
Yeah.
We're fortunate we think about, where's the closest fire station for
Right.
the insurance purposes, right? But we want folks to just have a great understanding of what it looks like, and growth and complacency.
Yep.
We talk about, people say, oh, I went through Hurricane Matthew, I went through Florence, I went through Dorian, which, if you were in certain areas, yes, impressive. If you were in Bahamas for Dorian, you can say you've probably seen about as bad as it gets. But for most of us in the county, we've not been truly tested.
Right.
And we're
Most of our hurricanes have, I call them their nuisances. It's like, things are kind of off for a day or two, but generally we're kind of
recovery
back on our
is quick.
feet.
You might have pockets that are dealing with that isolated flooding. Maybe there's some storm surge that did impact areas. Certainly don't want to write that off, but it could be very isolated. The county's what's going on where. So for the most people, it is, hey, wake up the next day, clear some debris, but overall I can go to the movies later, which is great. But we want folks to understand, there is going to be that storm that's going to not be a nuisance. It's going to be a true hit. It's going to be relatively devastating for the area, and we want folks just to be ready for that. Not to worry that it's going to happen, but if y'all are on TV saying this could be the one, and we're starting to say, we are in agreement that looks like the one, it certainly will change that equation, and we just want folks to be ready, because every storm is different, every storm is dangerous, every storm is going to have impacts to someone in the county. Might not be you, might not be your neighbor, but someone's going to maybe have the worst day of their lives, and we just want folks to understand that. So being patient and flexible and lending a helping hand where they can goes a long way. Being a good neighbor is all we can ask for, and the base of it all.
Thomas, I got to ask before we wrap this up, why emergency management, and was it a storm in particular growing up that just sparked your fascination with weather? That's typically what happens.
I can't say. You're relatively on the nose. There was never just one storm. I grew up in coastal New Jersey, so we really didn't have hurricanes. We had nor'easters and things like that. I will say, if I could have chosen a career path that I was pretty much I would love to do that, it would have been a meteorologist. Unfortunately, math and science did not
It's a lot.
inherently strong suited for. So I went into the communications field, and I just went through public relations, things like that. I didn't even know what a public information officer was until I applied to this role, and was fortunate enough to be hired by the county. But it's a perfect fit for me. I mean, I get to use my skills in communication and public relations, and still get to interact in the weather world. It's not forecasting the weather, and no one wants Tom to predict the weather by any means. But at least I can help people get more prepared, better prepared, understand the risks that are involved with the weather, and that's been great. So getting to interact with y'all, the other meteorologists in the area, and I've been fortunate enough to get to go to the National Hurricane Conference. I get to geek out on the weather while doing what I'm better suited for, skill set wise. So it's been perfect. It's been wonderful. And I just love getting to do stuff, talk to the folks.
Yeah.
I think getting out. I think y'all agree. Getting to go out in public and interact with the folks and answer the
Yeah.
questions. It's wonderful. And I think 9 out of 10 times everyone leaves there and they say, I definitely at least learned something today, or I feel better about
Yeah.
my situation. And that's all we can ask for. So yeah, I absolutely love it. They call me Calm Tom in the EOC because I try not to be. I don't want to get too flapped about stuff. They have their intensity scales. I have mine. So, but yeah, it's been wonderful, and
It's awesome.
Hope to be here for many more years doing this.
Yeah, well, we hope so too, because like I said at the beginning, you guys over there at Horry County are just some of the best of the best, and we are certainly blessed in this part of the country and this part of the state to have you guys. So we appreciate you coming on the podcast. And hopefully we don't, hear much from you the rest of the season.
I will be very happy if we're not doing live phone interviews or Zoom interviews in the coming weeks here.
You have the reporters parked out front of the EOC.
Listen, happy to chat with y'all, but yeah, hopefully it's not about what is potentially going to happen to our...
And real quick, where can people pick these up? These are everywhere.
So those are available at the different library branches throughout the county. If folks need one, they can also reach out to our office. We'd be happy to send them some. And like I said, we are out in public. We speak to the HOA groups, things like that. We bring these with us. So, and if you don't want a print copy, it is on the county website. You can get that right there. There's an interactive map for finding your evacuation zone. We try to make it as easy as possible.
Love it. Love it. All right, Thomas Bell, we appreciate it.
Yeah, Hurricane Week continues all week here on WMBF News. And for all things hurricane, you can visit, of course, Horry County Emergency Management, or even go to our Hurricane Center there on our website.
Got it all there, too.
We'll see you a little bit later this week for another episode of Are You Serious?